Bunny Flopkins. It was a sunny afternoon in the quaint suburban area of Crepperton, and Rowley, a mischievous boy, was feeling bored. He was desperately seeking something thrilling to do to entertain himself, so he decided to pay a visit to his friend, Pedro. Perhaps some fox poo stew would do the trick. Pedro's house, which looked like a small penis, was located at the end of the block, and it only took Rowley a few minutes to get there. He rang the bell, and Pedro's mother welcomed him in. She was busy in the kitchen, cooking something that smelled terrible. "Hello, Rowley. It's good to see you," she said while wiping her hands on her apron. "Pedro is in the living room, waiting for you." Rowley beamed. He didn't particularly like Pedro, but the prospect of stealing some fox poo stew made the visit worthwhile. As he walked into the living room, Pedro greeted him with a smile. He was watching TV, but when Rowley appeared, he turned it off. "Hey wanker, what the fuck are you doing?" Pedro asked while patting the spot next to him on the couch. "Just wetting myself. I'm so hungry, what can I eat?" Rowley replied. Pedro grinned. "Fox poo stew, my mom's specialty." Rowley pretended to be excited, but in reality, he hated the dish. However, since he had nothing else to do, he settled for the stew and started eating in silence. As he was eating, he saw Pedro's pet rabbit, Peter, sitting in the corner of the room. Rowley had never seen the rabbit before, and he couldn't resist the temptation of playing a prank. So, when nobody was looking, he picked the rabbit up and stuffed it into his backpack. Pedro's parents didn't notice anything suspicious, and Pedro was too busy watching TV to care. So, Rowley quickly snuck out of the house with the rabbit in tow. When he got home, Rowley opened his backpack, and the rabbit blinked at him. He was happy with his prank, but he needed to take it a step further. So, he got some fluff and ketchup from his kitchen and made it look like Peter had been attacked by the family dog. Rowley's parents didn't notice anything unusual when he came home, but they complained about the smell of the stew and the fluff ketchup concoction. Rowley told them it was nothing and retreated to his bedroom, where he put Peter in a biscuit tin and changed his name to Bunny Flopkins. But, Rowley had a short attention span, and he forgot all about Bunny Flopkins. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and before he knew it, he had gone an entire term without checking on his new pet. When he opened the biscuit tin, a horrific sight greeted him. Bunny Flopkins was no more than a skeleton, and Rowley jumped back in disgust. However, his immediate reaction was to laugh, and he thought that Bunny Flopkins had made a fantastic Halloween costume. He dressed the skeleton rabbit in some old clothes and put him on display on his desk. Rowley's parents were appalled by the smell coming from his room, and they begged him to throw away whatever was causing it. But Rowley, who had developed an interest in macabre things, loved the smell of death. He refused to throw Bunny Flopkins away. As time went on, Rowley became obsessed with Bunny Flopkins. He talked to him, dressed him up differently every day, and gave him imaginary conversations. He had forgotten completely about Pedro and his family, and he didn't care about anything else. One evening, as Rowley was busy playing with Bunny Flopkins, he heard a piercing scream coming from outside. It was Pedro's mother, and she was shouting Pedro's name. Rowley felt a twinge of guilt, but he quickly brushed it off and continued to play. The next day, Rowley went to school, and he saw posters everywhere. They read "Missing Peter the Rabbit." Pedro's family had put up posters all over town, searching for their beloved pet. Rowley felt a pang of fear. Had he gone too far? He realized that he had taken something that didn't belong to him, and he had done something terrible to it. He knew he had to return the rabbit, but he was too afraid of the consequences. Days turned into weeks, and the guilt was eating him up inside. He had forgotten about Bunny Flopkins and was now consumed with his actions. Finally, he mustered up the courage to return the rabbit. He put Bunny Flopkins in a bag and walked over to Pedro's house. When he rang the doorbell, Pedro's mother answered. "Hi, I'm sorry, I took your rabbit," Rowley said, holding out the bag. Pedro's mother looked at him in disbelief. "You took our rabbit? That is despicable, young man," she said, shaking her head. Rowley didn't argue. He knew what he had done was wrong, and he deserved the scorn. Pedro's mother took Peter out of the bag, and the rabbit looked weak and thin. Rowley felt a surge of guilt and sadness. He had taken something that wasn't his and had returned it in a terrible state. After apologizing profusely, Rowley left Pedro's house. He walked back home, feeling ashamed and remorseful. He went straight to his room, and he looked at Bunny Flopkins, now more of a reminder of his misdeeds than a funny Halloween costume. With tears in his eyes, Rowley picked up Bunny Flopkins, and he hugged him close. He knew he had a lot of growing up to do, and he had to make amends for his actions. But, for now, he would try to make things right by taking better care of Bunny Flopkins and honoring Peter's memory by being a better person. Rowley and the Gangsters. Rowley was a strange boy. He was always up for doing weird things like climbing trees and jumping into piles of leaves, and he had a fascination with all things gross and smelly. Most kids in his class thought he was weird, and wouldn't dare to hang out with him. But Rowley didn't care. He was perfectly happy in his own dirt-covered world, even if it did sometimes let him into some pretty sticky situations. One day, during the autumn holidays, Rowley was out on one of his usual explorations around the neighborhood when he ran into a man named Big Tom. Big Tom was a tall, burly figure, with a thick beard and tattoos covering his arms and neck. He looked like the type of person that you wouldn't want to mess with. But Rowley, being the curious and fearless kid that he was, didn't feel intimidated at all. He struck up a conversation with Big Tom, and to his surprise, they got along instantly. Big Tom was a gangster, and he had a group of friends who were also involved in all sorts of illegal activities. Rowley was fascinated by this aspect of Big Tom's life, and started hanging out with him and his gang more and more. But being so young, Rowley didn't fully understand the dangers and consequences of what Big Tom and his friends were doing. They would sell drugs like weed and painkillers, and even had a thriving business selling crumpets that they had stolen from a local bakery. Rowley relished the excitement of participating in these activities, and he felt like he was part of something big and important. But he didn't realize just how much trouble he was getting himself into. One day, Vinny, one of the more grumpy members of the gang, was left in charge of a young girl named Nella. Nella was a shouty toddler who never seemed to stop swearing and saying "No, that's my mummy," and Vinny was having a hard time keeping her quiet. In frustration, Rowley threw a bag of nukes into Vinny's house, thinking it would be a funny prank. But Vinny was not amused. He was furious, and threatened to kick Rowley out of the gang unless he could make it up to him. Terrified of losing his place in the gang, Rowley scrambled to find a way to make it up to Vinny. That's when he remembered seeing a bank in the area that looked like it could be easily robbed. He approached Big Tom with the idea, and the gang agreed that it was a good plan. They spent several days planning and gathering the necessary supplies, and finally, the day of the robbery arrived. Rowley was tasked with staying outside as a lookout while the rest of the gang went inside to rob the bank. But as he was keeping watch, he noticed a police car driving down the street. Panicking, Rowley started shouting and waving his arms, trying to alert the gang inside. But it was too late. The police had already noticed the commotion and were on their way over. In his confusion and fear, Rowley blurted out that the gang had just robbed the bank. The police quickly apprehended the gang members, and they were all sent to jail. Rowley's family had always thought he was a bit of a troublemaker, so they were overjoyed when he told them that he had helped the police catch a group of dangerous criminals. They threw a massive celebration in his honor, complete with a big cake and lots of presents. But as Rowley sat back and enjoyed the festivities, he couldn't help but feel a bit guilty about what had happened to Big Tom and the rest of the gang. In the end, he tried to bail them out of jail with the 10p he had in his pocket, but the bail was set much higher than that. So he simply shrugged his shoulders and walked away, ready to move on to his next adventure. Rowley took a deep breath and mustered up the courage to visit the gang members in prison. As he stepped into the cold, sterile environment of the correctional facility, he couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and remorse. Walking down the prison corridors, Rowley searched for the gangster's cell. Finally, he found it and noticed Big Tom, Leah, and the rest of the crew sitting despondently inside. Their faces lit up with surprise and confusion upon seeing Rowley. Taking a deep breath, Rowley approached the cell bars, standing tall with newfound confidence. He looked each gang member in the eye, disappointment etched on his face. "You guys," Rowley started, "what you did was wrong. We were just messing around, but it went way too far. You hurt people, scared them, and now you're paying the price." Big Tom, usually intimidating and gruff, seemed taken aback by Rowley's words. He listened as Rowley continued. "I can't be a part of that life anymore. It's not worth it. I realize that my actions have consequences, and I need to be responsible. Life is about making choices, and I choose to do the right thing from now on." The gang members fell silent, absorbing Rowley's words. There was a mixture of regret, anger, and longing for a fresh start written on their faces. As Rowley turned to leave, he stopped in his tracks and grinned mischievously. In a sudden burst of playful rebellion, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bag of dog poo. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the bag into the gangster's cell. The gangsters howled with laughter, even the stern guards couldn't help but crack a smile. It was a small reminder of their wild and reckless past, but also a symbol of Rowley's growth and the bond they shared. Leaving the prison, Rowley felt a mix of relief and accomplishment. He had confronted his past, not just within the gang but within himself. As he walked home, he couldn't help but notice the enticing smell coming from the local pet store. Curiosity piqued, Rowley stepped inside and found himself surrounded by shelves filled with colorful fish food. Remembering the lesson he had learned, he chuckled to himself and decided to buy a fish to take care of instead. With a newfound sense of responsibility, Rowley returned home and set up a small aquarium. He watched the vibrant fish gliding gracefully through the water, and in that moment, and one was called Darwin, he made a promise to himself to always consider the consequences of his actions. And so, Rowley's mischievous adventures continued, but now with a greater understanding of the impact he could have on others. His journey through life became a thrilling balancing act between mischief and responsibility, as he learned that even the smallest actions could make a big difference. Rowley and the Bees. Rowley was always a curious kid, but he was also a bit dim-witted. His mother often found herself rolling her eyes at his antics and his father would shake his head and say, "Kids these days." However, when Rowley discovered the jar of honey on the kitchen countertop, he found himself intrigued. He hadn't seen anything like it before. His mum had always made him oatmeal for breakfast, and so he had never been exposed to honey. He picked up the jar and squinted at it, inspecting every little detail. The honey looked thick and rich, and the color was a deep golden brown. He thought it might be some kind of lotion or body cream. He quickly unscrewed the lid and scooped up a handful of the gooey substance. He rubbed it all over his exposed skin, his face, and his hair. The feeling of the honey on his skin made him tingle with excitement. It was different from anything he'd ever experienced before. He loved the sticky feeling and how it made him feel as though he was coated in a layer of goo. In his mind, the honey was a new toy to play with. Rowley spent the next few days holed up in his room, reading books about bees and honey. He was fascinated by the way that bees worked together and how they made honey. He decided that he wanted to become a beekeeper and learn everything there was to know about bees. One sunny afternoon, Rowley decided to go outside and play with his special ball. His prized possession was a former toy of a German leader, and he was proud of it. As he was playing, he noticed a bee buzzing around him. Without any fear, Rowley reached out and playfully swatted the bee, making himself and his friend, Rowley, laugh. However, instead of flying away, the bee became angry and started to sting him. Rowley found it bizarre to witness the bee becoming so temperamental, and his response to getting stung was not what one would expect. The sensation of the sharp sting left Rowley feeling euphoric. It made him so happy that he got stung 20 more times on his hands and arms. With each subsequent sting, his euphoria grew stronger. Rowley was now addicted to the sensation of getting stung by bees. He started to collect the stingers and put them in a jar alongside the jar of honey. The sting of a bee was now his sweet spot. Rowley's mum soon noticed that there were more bees around the house than usual. She was worried about Rowley's fascination with them and began to keep a closer eye on him. However, Rowley was so caught up in his obsession that he didn't even notice the danger. One day, while the bees were swarming around the house, Rowley decided to set up a honey trap in his yard. He was hoping to attract more bees so that he could get more stings. He set out task after task to attract the bees to the honey trap. He was completely consumed by his obsession. It wasn't long before the bees became aggressive and started swarming around Rowley. He was caught up in the moment and didn't realize that he was in danger. He continued to try and get stung, despite being stung already more times than he could count. It wasn't until his mother saw him through the window, covered in bees, that she realized how dangerous the situation had become. Rowley's parents rushed outside to rescue their son and were able to pull him to safety. He was lucky that he hadn't been stung to death, but he was severely swollen and had a high fever due to the bee venom in his body. Rowley's parents immediately took him to the hospital. The doctors were shocked by the number of bee stings on his body. They declared that he was lucky to be alive and prescribed him with medications to help alleviate the swelling and pain. After spending several days in the hospital, Rowley's parents brought him back home. He was different than before. He realized how foolish he had been, and how lucky he was to be alive. He was now scared of bees, and his fascination with them had faded away. He threw away his jar of stings and stopped collecting honey from his neighbors' yards. His parents were thankful that their son had learned such a valuable lesson and hoped that he would become less thoughtless going forward. Rowley learned that not everything that fascinates him is good for him and to always have caution with potentially dangerous things. The ordeal had taught him a hard-won lesson, and while his obsession with bees was finished, he never lost his curiosity. As Rowley's obsession with bees grew stronger, he started to become more reckless. He would go out of his way to provoke them, just so he could feel the sting. His behavior became erratic and his family began to worry about him. One night, Rowley became particularly daring. As his family slept, he snuck into the kitchen and grabbed the jar of honey. With a mischievous grin, he went into his parents' room and poured the honey all over his father while he slept. His plan was to have the bees chase and sting his dad, just as they had done to him. However, things quickly spiraled out of control. As Rowley poured the honey on his dad, the bees were immediately attracted to the sweet scent. But as they buzzed around, Rowley accidentally spilled some of the honey on himself as well. Suddenly, the bees turned their attention towards him and began to chase him around the room. Rowley tried to run away, but the bees were relentless. They chased him out of the house and into the yard. Without realizing it, Rowley had led the bees right to his dad, who was highly allergic to bee stings. As his dad was being stung, Rowley tried to explain what had happened, but it was too late. His dad was struggling for breath, and they had no epinephrine pen to help him. Rowley's family rushed his dad to the hospital, but it was touch and go for a while. His dad spent several days in the intensive care unit, and his family was terrified that he might not make it and he died. Meanwhile, Rowley was grounded. His parents were furious with him for his reckless behavior, and they wanted him to learn a lesson. They made him stay in his room for 69 days without any toys, books, or music. They insisted that he had plenty of time to think about his actions and consider the consequences of his behavior. At first, Rowley was angry and resentful. He felt like his punishment was unfair, and he couldn't understand why his parents were so upset with him. But as the days went by, he started to realize just how foolish he had been. He learned to appreciate the silence and the solitude, and he started to realize just how lucky he was to have a loving family who cared for him. He also started to think about the bees differently. He realized that they weren't just a source of amusement or a way to feel an intense sensation of pain. They were living creatures that deserved respect and careful consideration. When Rowley was finally allowed out of his room, he was a changed person. He apologized to his family and promised to never put them in danger again. He also decided to volunteer at a local beekeeping organization so he could learn more about bees and their importance in our ecosystem. Rowley's experience taught him a valuable lesson about responsibility and empathy. He learned to be more mindful and careful in his actions, and he was grateful for the opportunity to make things right with his family and the world around him. Rowley's new car. Rowley had always been a mischievous young boy. He loved to play in his front garden, often making the fish in the pond breathe air, an impossible featuring for the creatures. He would sit back, watching them gasp and flail, giggling uncontrollably. One day, Rowley was eagerly waiting for his dad to come home. His dad had promised him a surprise, so Rowley was bouncing off the walls with excitement. As he waited, he noticed his dad's car in the driveway, tempting him with its shiny exterior. Suddenly, his dad rushed in, panting. "I'm parched, do you mind if I grab an ice lolly quickly?" he asked, not waiting for a response as he rushed inside. Rowley's eyes darted quickly to the car key, which was still in his dad's coat pocket. He sensed his opportunity and swooped in, taking hold of the key. Tiptoeing out of the house, Rowley approached the car, his heart racing with excitement. His little hands trembled as he inserted the key into the lock. Slowly but surely, he managed to get the engine roaring to life. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, he started his first adventure. Alas, Rowley was too young to drive and had no clue how to control the car. It wobbled and veered left and right, narrowly missing the plants lining the driveway. But then, disaster struck. Rowley couldn't avoid a group of protesters who were blocking the road, and he smashed straight into them. The protesters weren't pleased, to say the least, but they couldn't deny that Rowley had inadvertently stopped them from continuing their protest. Amidst the chaos, Rowley noticed a grand car approaching, and he had no time to react. The car belonged to none other than the Queen herself, who was furious and terrified at the sudden crash. Rowley knew he had messed up big time, and he made a run for it, abandoning the car and making a beeline for his house while the authorities dealt with the mess. The car crash made the headlines of every newspaper in the country, and the Queen made it known that she wanted justice for the damage done. All eyes were on the culprit, and Rowley knew he was in big trouble. To make matters worse, the police received a call from a school, stating that a child had been run over by a car in the schoolyard. Rowley's heart sank as he realized his actions had caused even more damage. He sprinted towards the school, his little legs working hard as he tried to right his wrongs. When he arrived, he was horrified to see a chain of children, like dominoes, had been knocked over by his out-of-control vehicle. When the police arrived at the scene, Rowley was petrified. He knew he had made a terrible mistake and he would be punished for it. The officers sternly scolded him and asked him how on earth he had access to a car. In a moment of panic, Rowley lied and said that his dad had allowed him to drive the car. The police officers took Rowley's words seriously and promptly arrested his dad. Rowley was shocked and confused as he watched his father being led away in handcuffs. He didn't know what to do or how to undo the terrible mess that he had made. The next few days were a blur for Rowley. He was racked with guilt, and he couldn't bring himself to eat or play, knowing that his dad was in prison because of his actions and will get the Elcric share. The only thing that brought him solace was the fact that the protesters had declared him a hero for accidentally running them over. However, such small victories hardly helped Rowley sleep at night. He would often dream about the accident, seeing the car crashing into the innocent bystanders over and over again. He felt like he had ruined his life, his father's life, and the lives of all the people he had hurt. One day, Rowley decided to take matters into his own hands. He knew he couldn't undo what had happened, but he could try to make amends. He approached the protesters who had applauded him, and he apologized for accidentally running them over. They forgave him and thanked him for stopping their protest, but Rowley still felt like it wasn't enough. He then went to the families of the children he had knocked over and tried to apologize to them as well, but they were too angry. They shouted at him, blamed him for their children's injuries, and even threatened to call the police. Rowley couldn't be arsed. He knew he had messed up, but he was trying his best to make it right. He didn't know where to turn or who to talk to. His only hope was that his father would be released from prison soon and that he would be able to make things better. Days turned into weeks, and Rowley was sadder and lonelier than ever. He missed his dad and his old life, and he wished he could turn back time and make better choices. But he knew he couldn't, and he had to face the consequences of his actions. One day, a miracle happened. A man in a fancy suit showed up at Rowley's doorstep and asked to speak to him. Rowley was surprised but also hesitant. He didn't know who the man was or what he wanted from him. The man introduced himself as a lawyer who had been hired by the Queen herself. The Queen wanted to speak to Rowley, and she wanted to hear his side of the story. Rowley was shocked but also excited. He couldn't believe he was going to meet the Queen. The lawyer took Rowley to the palace, where he was greeted by the Queen herself. She was kind and gentle, and she listened patiently as Rowley told her his story. She wasn't angry or upset with him. Instead, she praised him for trying to make things right and for owning up to his mistakes. The Queen then did something that shocked Rowley even more. She said his father and will get the electric chair. She explained that she had heard Rowley's side of the story and knew that his father had nothing to do with the accident, but she needs a laugh, so Rowley's dad getting the chair would be so funny to hear, and Rowley agreed. Rowley was overjoyed. He hugged the Queen and thanked her for being so kind and understanding. He couldn't believe that he had been given a second chance at life. As Rowley walked out of the palace hand in hand, he knew that he had learned a valuable lesson. He knew that even though he had made a terrible mistake, he could make things right again. All he had to do was own up to his mistakes and try to make things right. Rowley had a newfound appreciation for life and was grateful to the Queen for giving him a second chance. His dad was being blindfolded in the electric chair room. Then the man pulled the lever and he screamed, and Rowley recorded it for his new YouTube video, and then his dad's eyes popped. Rowley the Ice Cream Man. Once upon a time, in a small town called Brightville, there lived a young and mischievous boy named Rowley Jefferson. At the tender age of 10, Rowley had a penchant for colorful adventures and an imagination that knew no bounds. He was known throughout the town for his pranks and antics, always keeping his friends entertained. One sunny morning, Rowley was up to his usual tricks. In his backyard, he found himself playing with a toy vape, puffing out wisps of pretend smoke as he explored the make-believe world he had created. It was during this playful moment that his mischievous gaze fell upon a white van parked a few blocks away, sporting a for sale sign propped on its windshield. Curiosity piqued, Rowley's mind began to race with possibilities. He approached the van cautiously, almost tiptoeing as he admired its gleaming exterior. The owner, noticing Rowley's interest, beckoned him closer. A deal was struck, and to Rowley's disbelief, he managed to purchase the van for a mere £2.50. Excitement overwhelmed Rowley as he stared at the blank canvas before him. In his heart, he knew he could turn this plain white van into something magical. Armed with cans of vibrant spray paint, Rowley got to work, bringing to life his dream of an ice cream paradise on wheels. He covered the van with his favorite frozen delights, painting cones, popsicles, and a large sign that read ice cream in bold letters. Satisfied with his creation, Rowley hopped into the driver's seat, ready to embark on his grand adventure as the town's newest ice cream man. As Rowley cruised through the neighborhood, his van decorated with colors and delicious treats, the townspeople couldn't help but do double takes. The townsfolk mistook Rowley's exuberant creation for something far more sinister, a kidnapper's vehicle. Word traveled quickly through the town, spreading like wildfire, until even the local news became involved. Rowley, blissfully unaware of the commotion brewing around him, happened to tune into a radio station playing in the background of his van. To his astonishment, the reporter's voice boomed through the speakers, alerting the town to the notorious two-toothed goon who was supposedly on the loose, driving an ice cream van just like Rowley's. Chuckling to himself, Rowley couldn't fathom that they were actually talking about him. He didn't grasp the fact that people were confusing the two-toothed goon with his van because of the 2 teeth he lost recently due to growing up. Little did Rowley know, his harmless fun was about to take an unexpected turn. On one of his ice cream selling routes, Rowley spotted a 3-year-old boy with 2 tiny emerging teeth. Fueled by excitement and a sense of playfulness, Rowley jokingly referred to the child as Two Tooth, thinking it would bring laughter to his parents. However, the child's parents, upon witnessing Rowley taking their little boy into the van, were struck with sheer panic. They immediately assumed Rowley was attempting to steal their child, his van's decorations appearing as nothing more than a facade for his true intentions. Distraught and overwhelmed, the parents confronted Rowley, accusing him of child abduction. Frozen in shock, Rowley struggled to explain himself, his innocent intentions falling on deaf ears. Resolute in his duty to protect the child, Rowley climbed back into his van, instinctively driving straight to the nearest police station, little Two Tooth still in tow. Arriving at the police station, Rowley hastily pushed the child towards the officers, trying to clarify the situation. "Here is the two-toothed goon you were talking about on the news," he exclaimed, hoping they would understand the mistake. The police, initially bewildered, arrested Rowley instead, beginning to piece together the confusion surrounding the white van and the ice cream man fiasco. Rowley found himself sitting in a cold, sterile cell, his mind racing with fear and worry. Hours later, after thorough questioning and investigations, the police finally understood Rowley's innocence. He explained his intentions clearly, emphasizing that he only wanted to sell ice creams and ice lollies, never intending to cause harm or worry. The police realized their mistake and released him with a heartfelt apology. As a gesture of reconciliation, the police offered Rowley a new opportunity, a cart filled to the brim with sweets, treats, and his cherished bum crabs. Alongside the cart, they bestowed upon him a sincere message, reminding him to be more mindful of the potential consequences his actions might have. With newfound wisdom and humility, Rowley accepted their gifts and wisdom, vowing to be more careful in the future. From that day forward, Rowley traversed the streets of Brightville, pushing his cart, and bringing smiles to the faces of children, parents, and neighbors alike. He used this chance to educate others about the importance of understanding and communication, spreading joy and laughter wherever he went. And so, Rowley, the reformed ice cream man, spent his days selling sweets and treats, all the while weaving tales of lessons learned. Through his newfound wisdom, he embarked on a journey of self-discovery, continually reminding himself to be cautious and considerate in his actions. In the end, Rowley's adventures taught him valuable life lessons, leaving him forever changed and eager to bring happiness to all those he encountered. After Rowley's adventure with the ice cream van, he realized that it was time for him to move on from his days of ice cream selling. His van had been damaged in the confusion with the police and he knew it was time to give it up. So, he took the van to be repaired, hoping to restore it to its former glory. Unfortunately, the repairs proved to be more costly than he had hoped. Rowley wasn't sure what he should do with the van now. He considered selling it, but he didn't think anyone would want it in the condition it was in. One day, Rowley's friend Gug offered to take the van off his hands, telling him that he had a plan for it. Rowley knew Gug was always full of wild ideas, but he was intrigued to see what his friend had in mind. Gug quickly set to work on the van, putting his unique talents to use. He added speakers, strobe lights, and even a bubble machine to the van. When he was finished, he handed the keys to his brother, Roderick, also known as the Sleeping Butterfly. Roderick was always up to something, and the van was just the latest in his long line of projects. He immediately set to work, tearing out the seats and adding a giant ball pit to the back, filling it with thousands of brightly colored balls. He also installed a giant slide that went from the roof of the van down into the ball pit. Next, Roderick added a popcorn machine, cotton candy machine, and a nacho cheese dispenser. As the van started taking shape, Roderick began to think of ways to make it even more fantastic. He wanted to create something that would be talked about for years to come. One day, as he was sitting in the van, an idea occurred to him. He decided to turn the van into a room full of poo to eat. It was an odd idea, to be sure, but Roderick was determined to make it work. He started by collecting different types of brown foods, such as chocolate pudding, baked beans, and brownies. He then added in some gummy worms to complete the look. The resulting concoction was disgusting, but he knew it was exactly what he needed to create his epic experience. The van quickly became the talk of the town. Children flocked to it, eager to slide down the giant slide and play in the ball pit. They also wanted to try out the room full of poo, even though it looked gross. Roderick was happy to accommodate them, spooning out the disgusting mixture with a big smile on his face. Rowley couldn't believe what had become of his ice cream van. He shook his head in disbelief every time he saw it driving by, filled with children eating poo. He had never imagined that it would end up in such a strange, but oddly entertaining state. Despite the odd path the van had taken, Rowley knew that he could always count on his friends to make the best of any situation. The van had gone from selling ice cream to creating a unique experience that children would remember for years to come. With friends like Gug and Roderick, Rowley knew that life would always be full of surprises. Rowley's phone. Rowley was sitting on his dad's phone, playing GTA Mobile and watching Peppa Pig videos. He loved spending time on his dad's phone, and it was always a treat when he got to play with it. As he was playing, he suddenly saw the phone button. He couldn't resist the temptation and decided to call lots of people. First, he called McDonald's and asked them for a poo burger and willy chips. The lady on the other end of the line thought he was so naughty, but still gave him the order. Rowley was so happy to have his favorite food, and he savored every bite. Next, he called KFC and told them to watch Chicken Run. They thought he was so funny and asked him to come and play with them. Rowley was tempted to go and play, but he knew he had to save some energy for his next call. He then called Specsavers and swore at them. They were not impressed with his behavior and asked him to calm down. Rowley apologized and promised to never do it again. He knew he had to be more careful with his actions, and he didn't want to cause any trouble for the people he was calling. As he was making his last call, he called the police and faked that he was being killed. The police came rushing to the scene, but they were disappointed to find out that Rowley was lying. Rowley knew he had gone too far and agreed to never do it again. He promised to help the police do their job and save lives. From that day on, Rowley made sure to use his dad's phone responsibly. He played games, watched videos, and called people when he really needed to. He learned that he had to be more careful with his actions and that he had to help the people around him. Rowley was no longer the naughty boy he used to be, he was now a responsible and kind-hearted child. Rowley understood the consequences of his actions. It was his fault his father's phone got damaged, and he knew he had to pay for it. But, what he didn't expect was the punishment his dad had in store for him. Not being allowed any electronics was one thing, but not having any pocket money was a disaster for Rowley. He loved splurging on toys and snacks every week, and now he had nothing. To make matters worse, he felt guilty for breaking his dad's phone. He knew he had to make it up to him. Rowley offered to do extra chores around the house and even offered to get a part-time job to help pay for the phone's repairs. But his dad told him that he didn't want him to stress himself, he just wanted him to learn a lesson from what he's done. Rowley promised that he would never let his anger get the best of him again. He also made a promise to be more responsible with his electronics and to limit the use of his phone and iPad. He realized that there were more important things in life than playing games and watching videos all day. As time passed, Rowley stuck to his promise. He spent his free time learning new things, helping his dad around the house, and finding ways to make more money. While it wasn't easy without his phone, Rowley learned to appreciate the smaller things in life. A few months after the incident, Rowley's dad surprised him with a brand new phone. He told him that he was proud of how he had matured and learned from his mistakes. Rowley was ecstatic and grateful for the gift. He knew he had to be careful with it and that he had to show his dad that he had changed for the better. From that day on, Rowley always remembered the importance of responsibility, honesty and how small actions can have big consequences. He stayed true to his word and became a more mature and trustworthy person. The lessons he learned from his dad's broken phone stayed with him for the rest of his life, and he was grateful that his dad taught him such a valuable lesson through a small Rowley the hero. Rowley Jefferson was a 10-year-old boy who loved to read comics about superheroes. His favorite superhero was Captain Face, who had superhuman strength, speed, and the ability to fly. Rowley dreamed of being just like him, and he often imagined himself saving the world with his superpowers. One day, while Rowley was reading his comic book, he had an idea. He decided that he would become a superhero just like his idol. So, when he finished his dinner of roast beef and vegetables, he snuck out of his room through his window and set out to save the world. Rowley's dad was having a tough time digesting what he just heard, and he choked on his food. His mother quickly rushed to his aid, and after he stopped coughing, she asked Rowley what he meant. Rowley told his parents that he was going to save the world just like Captain Arseface. Rowley's mum read him a bedtime story, Captain Arseface and the Nasty Nappy, before he went off to sleep. As he drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of himself flying around the city, saving people from burning buildings and stopping evil villains from taking over the world. The next day, Rowley set out to save the world. He started by flying around the city using his dad's leaf blower. As he was flying, he saw a cat stuck in a tree. Rowley remembered that Captain Arseface always rescued animals, so he used his powers to push the cat out of the tree. Unfortunately, Rowley's powers were not strong enough to control his leaf blower, and he lost control, causing him to fall out of the sky and the cat to die. Feeling guilty, Rowley ran away from the scene of the accident. As he continued to fly around the city, he saw an old man stuck on the train tracks. Rowley remembered that Captain Arseface always helped people in distress, so he stopped to help the old man. He gave him some food, but he did not manage to save the man, and he was hit by a speeding train. Feeling more guilty than ever, Rowley decided to go back home. But when he arrived, he discovered that his country was under threat from the evil dictator Kim Jong-un, who had sent a nuclear missile to destroy the capital city. The military had no way of detecting the missile, and they had no way to defend themselves. But Rowley had an idea. He knew that he could use his powers to redirect the missile to another city, where it would not cause any damage. He quickly flew into action and used his leaf blower to redirect the missile to the city of Doncaster. Rowley knew that nobody liked Doncaster, so he thought it would be a great place to send the missile. As a result of Rowley's heroic actions, he became a hero overnight. The entire country was grateful for his efforts, and he was hailed as a hero by the media. But Rowley knew that he had made some mistakes along the way. He realized that being a hero was not just about saving the world with superpowers, but it was also about doing the right thing and helping others in need. From that day on, Rowley continued to read his comic books about superheroes, but he also learned to be a hero in his own way. He helped the homeless, the elderly, and the sick in his community, and he always tried to put others before himself. In the end, Rowley may not have been a superhero in the traditional sense, but he was a hero in the eyes of those he helped. The next day, Rowley woke up feeling proud of himself for being a hero and saving the city. But his joy was short-lived when the police knocked on their door. Rowley's father was arrested for encouraging his son to do bad things and for being reckless with his leaf blower. The police explained that what Rowley did was risky and put people's lives in danger. Feeling ashamed of himself, Rowley realized that what he did was not heroic at all. He had been foolish to copy the actions of a fictional character without thinking about the consequences. He felt guilty for causing the death of the cat and the old man's death on the train tracks. Rowley learned a valuable lesson that day. He realized that heroes didn't just have supernatural powers like Captain Arseface, they had morals, values, and principles that they lived by. He understood that to be a real hero, he needed to follow the rules, respect others, and do good deeds selflessly. As his dad went to trial, Rowley's life changed for the better. He spent more time studying and learning about what it meant to be a good person and not just a hero. He got involved in volunteer work, helping out at his local community center, and visiting sick people in the hospital. He learned that anyone could be a hero, and that true heroism came from making a positive impact on the world. Rowley knew that he had made a mistake by following a fictional character blindly, but he also knew that he had learned from his mistakes and grown as a person. In the end, Rowley became a real hero, not just a fictional one. and he knew that it all started with understanding the difference between right and wrong, and choosing to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. Rowley has a bath. Rowley had been playing in the fields all day, and he was covered in dirt and grime. But as he made his way home, he spotted something that caught his eye. A huge pile of horse dung rested in the middle of the pasture, and Rowley couldn't resist. He ran to the pile and began to play, rolling in it, using it to create mud pies, and having the time of his life. Hours passed, and soon the sun began to set. Rowley realized he needed to head home before it became too dark to see. As he entered the town, people couldn't help but hold their noses and stare. He was covered from head to toe in horse poo, and the smell was unbearable. Finally, Rowley arrived home. His mum was cooking bun crumb soup, and his dad was watching the football on TV. But as soon as they saw Rowley, they both started to gag. They quickly told him to go upstairs and take a bath, offering him no sympathy for his stinky adventure. Rowley began filling the tub with hot water, and as he looked around the bathroom, he noticed his mum and dad had left some strange items lying around. In their drawers, he found bottles of sulfuric acid, brown sauce, and even some toxic wastewater from their work. Rowley had an idea. He mixed the acid and wastewater into the tub, creating a fizzy and sparkly concoction, thinking it would make for an exciting bath. He added some brown sauce to the mix, and soon, his tub was full of a bubbly and syrupy brew. Rowley grabbed Mr. Sucky Ducky and Thirsty Fish, his favorite bath toys, and hopped in. The water felt warm and tingly on his skin, and the bubbles tickled his feet. Rowley was having the best bath of his life. He scrubbed his hair with the brown sauce and used a bread roll to clean his body, feeling cleaner than he had for days. But as he relaxed, his mum called up to him, telling him he had 5 minutes to finish up. Rowley didn't want the fun to end, so he stayed in the bath, not listening to his mother's warnings. Suddenly, a loud noise boomed from downstairs, and the house began to shake. Rowley could feel the water in the bath sloshing around, and as he reached for his towel, the whole house exploded. Rowley was sent flying out of the window, naked and confused. He hit the ground with a thud and looked back at his house, now engulfed in flames and smoke. Rowley was in shock, not sure what had just happened. It took him a moment to gather himself, but then he realized that he had used dangerous substances in his bath. Tears welled up in his eyes as he thought of his parents and their house. Rowley was lucky to have escaped with only a few bruises, but his parents were not. His mum and dad were taken to the hospital with severe burns and injuries. Rowley had learned a lesson he would never forget. He understood the dangers of playing with chemicals and promised to never experiment with dangerous substances again. Rowley's parents were saddened by what had happened, but they were grateful that Rowley was safe and had learned his lesson. The family had to stay together in a hotel until they could find a new home, and Rowley decided to take a break from playing outside for a while. Instead, he read books and watched TV with his parents, trying to make the best of an awful situation. Rowley had made a grave mistake by adding dangerous substances to his bath. But he had learned his lesson and was grateful that his parents had survived the explosion. From then on, Rowley was extra careful with everything he did, and he never played with chemicals again. He realized that sometimes it was important to listen to the warnings of others and that safety should always come first. Rowley goes to the cinema. Rowley was ecstatic when he heard that Captain Arthur Phase 4, The Nasty Woody was coming to the cinema. He had been waiting for this movie for months and had been saving all his pocket money to buy snacks for the occasion. As his father drove him to the cinema, Rowley sat in the back seat, munching on his favorite candy whilst collecting his bogies. He planned to give them out to everyone when he got to the cinema, as it would surely get everyone excited for the movie. They pulled into Tesco's scam shop and Rowley jumped out of the car, running inside to grab all the sweets, treats, and drinks that he could fit in his trolley. However, he also added a single grape to the cart for the sake of healthy eating, much to his dad's relief. As they arrived at the cinema, Rowley was practically bouncing with excitement and couldn't wait to dive into his treats. But as he made his way to his seat, he realized that his trolley had caused a stir among the cinema goers. People were staring at him in disbelief, whispering and pointing at the mountain of candy he had amassed. Ignoring the glares and murmurs, Rowley settled into his seat next to a grumpy-looking man called Adolf. But just as the movie was about to start, Rowley nervously pulled out his megaphone and shouted, "Who and we?" much to the horror of the audience. As the movie progressed, Rowley continued to shout and make a scene, even when the cinema-goers shushed him. Adolf was clearly not amused and shot him dirty looks for the rest of the film. But Rowley didn't care. He was having the time of his life. The next day at school, everyone was working quietly on their assignments, trying to solve the hard question of 1 plus 1. But Rowley had other ideas. He hopped onto the teacher's desk and began jumping up and down, screaming and shouting like he had in the cinema. His classmates rolled their eyes and groaned, but Rowley couldn't care less. He was reliving the movie in his mind and just wanted to share his excitement with everyone else. After school, Rowley gathered his closest friends, Gug, Darwin, Putin, and Stalin. Together, they decided they wanted to watch the movie again. So, they went online and searched for a dodgy live streaming site. Their teacher caught them in the act and decided to join them, thinking that it would be a fun way to bond with her students. But just as they found the movie and started to watch it, the police burst in and arrested their teacher for streaming the movie illegally. Rowley and his friends were shocked and disappointed, watching as their teacher was led away in handcuffs. They knew what they had done was wrong, but they couldn't help feeling thrilled that they had gotten a chance to watch the movie again. With no other choice, Rowley decided to go to the cinema with his friends to watch the movie properly. They pulled their money together and bought their tickets, settling into their seats with their snacks. For the duration of the film, they were all on edge, wondering if they would get in trouble again for being too loud or disruptive. But this time, they all managed to keep their excitement contained and watched the movie in silence. As the credits rolled, Rowley and his friends all breathed a sigh of relief. They had finally gotten to watch the movie without causing any chaos. And even though they knew it was wrong to act out like they had before, they couldn't help but feel a little proud of themselves for getting away with it. From that day on, Rowley learned to channel his excitement and passion for movies in a more appropriate way. He continued to go to the cinema regularly and loved nothing more than sitting with his friends, munching on sweets and watching all the latest movies. As he grew older, he realized that his love for movies would always be a part of him. And although he would never forget the chaos he had caused that day, he knew that it had been a learning experience that had helped him become a better, more thoughtful person in the end. Now, Rowley is all grown up and has even turned his love for movies and cinema into a career. He works as a film critic and has his own popular movie review blog, where he shares his thoughts and insights on the latest films. Despite his success, Rowley still remembers the lessons he learned from that fateful day at the cinema. He knows that life is all about balance, and that it's important to have fun and be passionate about things, but also to be aware of how our actions affect those around us. Rowley often thinks back to that day at the cinema and smiles, knowing that it had helped him become the person he is today. And he still loves sharing his passion for movies and cinema with others, whether it's through his reviews, or on the weekends, when he goes to the cinema with his friends just like he did when he was a kid. In the end, Rowley's experience at the cinema taught him a valuable lesson about responsibility and respect, and he has carried those values with him throughout his life. And he is grateful for that one single grape he added to his cart, which reminds him that even the tiniest choices can have an impact on our lives and the lives of others. Rowley's birthday. Once upon a time, there was a young boy named Rowley. He wasn't the brightest child, often making silly choices and saying stupid things. Today was a special day for Rowley, as he was celebrating his 11th birthday. As the sun rose, Rowley stirred awake in his bed. He had been dreaming about his favorite celebrities, Andrew Tate and Matt Smith, playing Call of Duty Black Ops 4. He abruptly sat up, his eyes wide open, and exclaimed, "It's my birthday." With excitement coursing through his veins, Rowley bounded out of bed and rushed downstairs to the lounge where his parents had laid out his presents. To his delight, there were gifts from both his parents and his friends. His parents had gotten him a ball, a lolly, a strange real-life gun, a nuke, and even a used sick bag from his dad, which he didn't quite understand. His mum, always knowing how to surprise him, had gifted him an Xbox, a PlayStation, and the hottest new console, the ClownJoy 5000. She even managed to find a dead fly, which she believed was a rare collectible. Putin, the neighbor who was always fond of quirky presents, had gifted him a knife, a gun, and various military paraphernalia because he believed Rowley had what it took to join the army. Kim Jong-un, another neighbor, had given him a slave and a frog, which confused Rowley immensely. Darwin, his water-loving friend, had gifted him a lead, which was rather unexciting in comparison. Eager to start his birthday celebrations, Rowley decided to go out for a special birthday lunch. He made his way to the local pub, unaware that it was not an ideal place for an 11-year-old's birthday celebration. When Rowley stepped inside, he was greeted by a loud cacophony of voices and the overwhelming scent of alcohol. The patrons were heavily inebriated, dancing clumsily and shouting profanities. Undeterred, Rowley took out his new toys and joined in the chaotic dance. He thought they were simply celebrating his birthday too. Little did he know, the intoxicated individuals had no idea it was his special day. Some cheered him on, while others continued their rowdy behavior. Feeling a bit overwhelmed by the situation, Rowley decided to invite all the drunk men to his birthday party. He convinced himself that they were just misunderstood and simply needed a bit of fun. As he left the pub, he led the way to his house with the motley crew following closely behind. Rowley's party was already in full swing when they arrived. His parents, grandparents, Aunt Beck, whom no one liked, and his friends Putin, Stalin, Kim Jong-un, Adolf, and Darwin were all there. Even his chubby dogs, Fido and Doggy Scoffchops, were excitedly wagging their tails. However, chaos ensued as the drunken party crashers stumbled into the festivities. Rowley, not knowing how to handle the situation, had an ingenious idea. He found a balloon, tied the drunk men to it, and sent them floating into space. Much to everyone's surprise, their heads popped due to the pressure, and they vanished into the abyss. With the troublemakers out of the way, the party continued without any further disruptions. Rowley and his loved ones danced and laughed, enjoying the celebration of his special day. The cake was cut, presents were opened, and laughter filled the room. As the day came to a close, Rowley's heart was full of joy. Despite the unexpected events, he had learned that the key to a successful celebration was being surrounded by loved ones who genuinely cared. And so, with gratefulness in his heart, Rowley drifted off to sleep, ending his eventful 11th birthday with dreams of many more exciting adventures to come. As Rowley snuggled under his covers, his dad sat on the edge of his bed, ready to begin the nightly bedtime story. This year, Rowley was excited to hear his favorite superhero story, Captain Arseface's birthday. But before his dad could start the story, Rowley suddenly popped up from his bed, clutching his sheets to his chest. "Oh no, I've done it again," he exclaimed, looking embarrassed. His dad couldn't help but chuckle at the sight of his son, who had just realized that he had, in fact, pooed the bed. As punishment, he had to eat it, and worse, he had to go to bed, leaving his dad to finish the story on his own. But as Rowley lay in bed, his mind started to wander to the other superhero stories he loved. He thought back to the time he had dressed up as Captain Arsefaces for Halloween, complete with a homemade costume and a bag of candy. And then, in a moment of inspiration, Rowley decided to write his own superhero story. He couldn't wait to see his dad's reaction when he read it in the morning. With excitement building up inside him, Rowley drifted off to sleep, ready for whatever adventures the night may bring. Rowley the Doctor. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Rowley. He was 11 years old and was known by everyone in his neighborhood as the stupid one. Rowley had a vivid imagination and loved watching his favorite funny show, Moron Vito. In this show, Vito would often pretend to be a doctor, which fascinated Rowley. One day, after watching an episode of Moron Vito, Rowley couldn't shake off the idea of becoming a doctor himself. He approached his dad, Robert Jefferson, with a hopeful expression on his face. "Dad, can you please take me to the fancy dress store? I want to buy a doctor costume like Vito." Robert looked at Rowley, a little taken aback by the sudden request. "Rowley, don't you think being a doctor is a bit serious for someone your age? Maybe we can find something else for you at the store," he suggested. But Rowley was determined. "No, Dad, please. I really want to be a doctor like Vito," he pleaded. Unable to resist Rowley's persistence, Robert finally agreed to take him to the fancy dress store. As they stepped into the store, Rowley's eyes widened with excitement. There were cat costumes, trigger masks, and even a blow-up Willy costume. Everything was so fun to look at, but then, Rowley noticed a realistic doctor costume hanging neatly on a rack. "That's it, Dad. That's the one I want," Rowley exclaimed, pointing towards the doctor costume. Robert, though hesitant, trusted his son's judgment and bought him the costume. That night, after Rowley's mum read him his bedtime story, she kissed him goodnight and left the room. Rowley waited for a while, making sure his parents were sound asleep, before sneaking out of the house dressed as a doctor. Rowley walked briskly through the quiet streets until he reached the local hospital. He had seen the doors of the hospital open numerous times on his way to school, but he had never been inside. Now, he had the chance to explore the mysterious hallways and secret rooms. Once inside, Rowley tiptoed around the bustling hospital, discreetly observing the doctors and nurses in action. However, his curiosity got the better of him, and he found himself entering the operating room. To his surprise, some nurses caught sight of Rowley in his doctor costume and mistook him for a real doctor. They urgently summoned him to help with the situation. Someone had swallowed a fly, a spider, a cat, a dog, a goat, and even a horse. Rowley's heart raced with excitement and fear. As he stood in the operating room, Rowley's nerves got the best of him. He suddenly realized that his joke had gone too far. But then, a burst of laughter escaped his lips. The absurdity of the situation overwhelmed him, and he couldn't help himself. Rowley clumsily attempted to carry out the operation, not having the slightest clue about what he was doing. Unfortunately, his lack of knowledge and experience led to a tragic accident. The woman on the operating table suffered a burst heart and passed away. Horror and guilt washed over Rowley, and he immediately confessed that he wasn't a real doctor. Chaos overtook the operating room as everyone tried to make sense of the situation. Rowley's father, Robert, was devastated and blamed himself for buying his son the doctor costume and allowing him to watch more on Vito. In a panic, Robert made an impulsive declaration, vowing to have his own head chopped off as punishment for his role in the tragedy. However, Rowley, though terrified, knew he had to think quickly to make amends. Remembering his dad's weak heart, Rowley proposed a daring plan. With the consent of the woman's family, he used his dad's heart to replace the one he had unintentionally destroyed. Miraculously, his desperate act worked, and the woman was revived. Grateful beyond words, the woman expressed her gratitude to Rowley. Her family, instead of blaming the young boy, saw the sincerity in his actions and understood his innocence. They threw a party to celebrate the woman's recovery, and Rowley was the guest of honor. From that day forward, Rowley knew that if he wanted to become a real doctor one day, he needed the right training and proper education. He realized that pretending to be a doctor was far from the reality of the profession and vowed to work hard to achieve his dream. And so, Rowley's journey to becoming a doctor began. With the love and support of his family and the determination sparked from his adventure in the hospital, Rowley set off on a path of learning, studying, and dedicating himself to the noble field of medicine. And one day, his dream of becoming a true doctor would come true. Despite his determination to become a doctor, Rowley faced challenges in the real world. The first job he landed as a medical assistant was not a great fit for him. His lack of experience and training made it difficult for him to keep up with the demands of the job. He struggled to remember the names of medical instruments, the correct procedures for administering medication, and found it difficult to stay focused during long shifts. Eventually, his shortcomings caught up with him, and he was let go from his job. Rowley was devastated. He had worked so hard to achieve his dream, only to be faced with failure. He sat alone in his bedroom, feeling sorry for himself, and wondering if he would ever make it as a doctor. However, Rowley was not one to give up easily. He took time to reflect on his mistakes, analyzed what went wrong, and made a plan to improve his skills. He realized that he needed more significant support in his education and training. He enrolled himself in a pre-med program at a local college and began taking courses. As he learned more about the complexities of the body's inner workings and the intricacies of medical practice, he began to understand the importance of perseverance, dedication, and hard work. Over time, Rowley's persistence paid off. Gradually, he started to excel in his coursework, demonstrating a more profound understanding of medical concepts and theory. He interned at local hospitals, gaining hands-on experience and training under accomplished doctors. Finally, the day arrived when Rowley graduated from medical school. He had worked hard to get there and felt proud of his accomplishments. He knew that the road ahead of him would be challenging, but his hospital adventure had already prepared him for the realities of the real world of medicine. With his diploma in hand and newfound confidence, Rowley began his career as a doctor. It was a journey that started with failure but ended with success. Rowley laughed when he thought back on his adventure as an 11-year-old boy playing doctor. He learned that there was more to it than playing dress-up, and realized he would have never made it on his own if it wasn't for the first job that sacked him. Rowley's adventure was full of twists and turns, but in the end, he found his way, step by step. Rowley and the party. Rowley, the stupid 11-year-old boy, was in bed in his Percy Pig underpants, and he was watching Tony and his mates on TV when he decided to go out of his window into town without his parents knowing. It was 8:45 p.m. and he went into the town hall. What he didn't know was that a nightclub party for teens and young adults was starting at 9:00 p.m. He was playing in the corner with his Tony trains when lots of young adults and grown-up teens came in. Because it was a nightclub party, everyone was dressed inappropriately, and Rowley even saw young girls' tits and he booped them. Rowley saw all the food and drinks and he ate all of the crisps and bumcrumbs, and all the teen men shouted at Rowley for eating the bumcrumbs, but then he saw the drinks but no one let him have them because it was whiskey and Rowley was too scared to ask for it. Rowley was now starting to feel embarrassed and ashamed of himself for being at the party in the first place. He had never been to a party before and he had no idea what to expect. The music was too loud for him and he could barely hear what the other children were saying. Rowley started to feel bored and restless as he was not enjoying himself. As the night went on, things started to get out of control. Rowley saw young girls' tits and he couldn't help but boop them. The other children were laughing and having a great time, but Rowley felt like an outsider. He started to feel scared and alone. Suddenly, the party took a turn for the worse. A group of teenagers started to get naked and start making babies. Rowley was horrified and scared. He knew he had to leave, but he didn't know how to get out of there. As he tried to make his way out of the nightclub, he bumped into a group of guards. They were not happy with him being there and started to push him out. Rowley started to feel scared and he knew he had to protect himself. He kicked one of the guards in the nuts and ran onto the stage. Rowley was now standing on the stage in his underpants with a big poo coming out of his bum. The other children were laughing and cheering him on. Rowley felt like he had never had so much fun in his life. The next day, Rowley's parents told him of the party and said he could only have £9 billion pocket money this week, but Rowley knew he was never going to that party again. He had learned a valuable lesson about not going to parties and not trusting strangers. Rowley was happy to stay at home and play with his trains and have his dad give him a bath. As the night came to an end, the party slowly started to wind down. The music was turned off, and the lights were turned on. The guests started to leave, and the nightclub was empty. Rowley was still in shock from what he had seen, and he was relieved that he was finally home. As he went into his room, he saw that his teddy bear had been destroyed. His favorite toy had been ripped apart, and its head had been cut off. Rowley started to cry, but he was soon comforted by his dog, Fido. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and Rowley knew that he was not alone. He opened the door to find the people from the party standing there, with torn clothes and shit on their faces. They had come to Rowley's house to dance and destroy his things. Rowley's dog, Fido, barked and bit the intruders in the ass, causing them to fall down the stairs. The old lady next door, Mrs. Hannigan, came out and saw the chaos. She quickly sewed Rowley's toys back together, and the intruders ran off, embarrassed and covered in shit. Rowley was relieved that his dog had been protective, and he thanked him for saving him from the people from the party. Rowley knew that he would never forget that night and that he would never go to another party again. He was happy to stay home and play with his trains and have his dad give him a bath with his horse poo bath bomb. Rowley and the nuke. Once upon a time, in the quaint town of Doncaster, there lived an 11-year-old twat named Rowley Jefferson. Despite his rather unflattering description, Rowley had a mischievous spirit and a love for playing pranks. Little did he know that this particular adventure would teach him a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. One sunny day, Rowley received a rather unexpected invitation. It was an invitation to have tea with the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, the notorious North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, and even Adolf Hitler. Yes, that Adolf Hitler. Bewildered and ecstatic, Rowley quickly packed his bags and set off to Moscow. With the help of an incredibly fast plane, it took him a mere 5 seconds to reach his destination. Arriving at Putin's grand residence, Rowley was greeted by Putin's guard dogs, who were surprisingly friendly. Puzzled yet excited, he made his way inside. To his surprise, he found the Russian president dressed in a brand new bikini, his nips flashing. Even more surprisingly, Kim Jong-un was greedily devouring the food on the table. As Rowley explored Putin's house, he stumbled upon a room that caught his attention. It was the nuke room, filled with various missiles. Filled with childlike curiosity and a pinch of ignorance, Rowley couldn't resist the temptation to explore further. When nobody was around, he shouted fireworks and pressed a button. In an instant, Doncaster was wiped off the map, turning everyone there into skeletons. As if that wasn't enough, Rowley then discovered a big, red button that sent all of Putin's nukes flying towards the United States and the United Kingdom. Chaos ensued, and soon both countries were filled with skeletal figures. Realizing the catastrophic consequences of his actions, Rowley watched a distraught Putin mourn the loss of his dream to nuke the moon. It was then that the police arrived, scolding Rowley for his irresponsible behavior. He was held accountable for the destruction he had caused, and was tasked with rebuilding all the buildings he had destroyed, as well as helping the survivors. This experience served as a wake-up call for Rowley. He realized the gravity of playing with dangerous and powerful things. As he worked tirelessly to make amends, Rowley grew into a responsible and more mindful individual. He vowed to never let his childish recklessness cause harm to others again. Years went by, and Rowley matured into a responsible adult, always carrying the lessons he had learned in his heart. He became a renowned engineer and advocate for peace, continually working towards preventing the misuse of power. Wherever he went, Rowley reminded people about the importance of handling dangerous things with utmost caution. And so, this once frivolous and reckless young boy evolved into a wise and responsible man. His story became an inspiration for all generations to come, proving that even the silliest of mistakes can lead to the greatest of transformations. But then he found a nuke in his underpants drawer. This time, Rowley had a more sinister plan in mind. He began reconfiguring the device, adding more firepower and efficiency to it. He wanted to show the world just how much power he could wield if he wanted to. He placed the nuclear device inside a small plane and took off, heading straight for the heart of New York City. As he closed in on his target, Rowley felt a surge of adrenaline and excitement pumping through his veins. He was going to be a worldwide sensation, feared and respected by all. But as he released the new and improved nuke from the plane, something went terribly wrong. The bomb didn't explode right away, but instead, it veered off course and landed and only killed his dad.